the father of Kennedy's children, next on Inside Monmouth College. Welcome to Inside Monmouth College. I'm your host, Donna Dolphin, and I'm very pleased to say that my guest today is Mr. Robert Patrick, author, actor, teacher, playwright. In fact, he is the most produced off-Broadway writer in the United States. He's perhaps best known for his play, Kennedy's Children, which has been translated into 60 languages and perhaps done all over the world. Kennedy's Children appeared on Broadway in 1975 for the first time. And he's here with us today because he's attending performances of Kennedy's Children at Monmouth College. Welcome to Inside Monmouth College.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you for going out of your way to be with us today.
Wow.
I want to start by asking you, what is the difference between Broadway, off-Broadway, and off-Broadway productions?
Oh, goody. We have a half hour?
Yes. Go on.
Broadway, as everyone knows, are the large commercial equity theaters, mainly around Times Square.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Off-Broadway is smaller equity commercial theaters, usually elsewhere. Off-Broadway was an entirely new idea in the history of theater that sprang up in New York's Greenwich Village at the beginning of the 60s. It was a spontaneous outburst of playwriting, acting, directing in coffee houses, garages, churches, bowling alleys. You know, there are many differences between them. I guess the principal one was that off-Broadway was the first time in the history of theater that there was a theater movement of any scope or duration. By scope, I mean, for instance, that in the middle 60s there were over 300 off-Broadway theaters in New York alone. And by duration, I mean, it's still going on now. I mean, here I am at Monmouth to see Kennedy's Children, 27 years later. The main difference was that in the past, theater had inevitably been under the jurisdiction of business, church, state, police, an academy, critics, and that was because theater cost a lot of money to do, you know, and took a lot of people and a place, you know, unlike painting, poetry, even music, which could be done anywhere by one person. So when we started doing plays in places which made their money in another way, like coffee houses, churches, galleries, we were the first people in the world to be able to do plays without worrying if we were going to get money for them. We weren't reviewed, so we didn't have to worry about critics. We weren't allowed by law to charge admission, so we didn't have to worry about popularity or drawing the public or the box office.
So it was purely expression-driven?
No one knew we were there, so we didn't have to worry about the police. You know, I mean, it was the first time theater was done independently and responsibly in the way that the other arts had begun to be done in the 1850s. You know, so you might say in the early 60s in New York, theater entered the 20th century, became a modern art movement. And it was so successful and so exciting that it's changed the face of world theater forever.
And now you were one of the founders of that movement as well.
I was around at the start of it. I suppose as much as there are founders, I was one, yeah.
And you were writing then?
I came to New York vaguely to act. Wandered into the Cafe Chino, the first of the off-Broadway theaters. In the first half hour I was in New York. It was a wonderful place. I loved it, and I stuck around because it was a wonderful place full of wonderful free, pre-hippie hippies. And I did stage managing and waited tables and washed dishes and even occasionally acted for 3 years. And at the end of that 3 years, I must subconsciously have picked up something about playwriting, because I wrote my first play, brought it in, they put it on, people liked it. I liked getting the attention. I did more, and then it turned into something quite different for me.
What was that first play?
It's called The Haunted Host. I did it in 1964 at the Chino, and just this year I've been to see 2 productions of it in Connecticut and Texas. It's wonderful. It still goes on 25 years later.
That must be very exciting to see that,
Yes.
to see that piece of you live on.
The people who perform it usually weren't born when I wrote it.
Do you look back and say, my God, what was I thinking at the time that I wrote that?
In some ways, I know precisely why I wrote it. What really baffles me is, how did I write so well then?
Now, you're a very prolific writer.
Usually when people say, what plays have you written, I say, most of them. Yeah.
You write, with the exception of Kennedy's Children, everything is off Broadway?
I've had plays done in the West End in London and in theaters of all levels. I've done most of my 200 or so produced plays off Broadway, because off Broadway they let me do what I want.
So do you prefer that?
I love the freedom of off Broadway. I love the money of Broadway.
Do you ever think, geez, I should sit down and write something that's going to make it on Broadway again?
Well, not really, because certainly no one would ever have dreamed in a million years that Kennedy's Children would ever get beyond a basement in Greenwich Village. So, since that's the play of mine that made it all over the world, I wouldn't quite know what to write deliberately.
Let's talk about Kennedy's Children. How come that made it, do you think?
A wonderful man named Don Parker saw it the first time that we did it in a 40-seat loft over a YWCA in New York, optioned it from me, that is, paid me for the right to go out and try to get commercial productions of it, and for 3 years flogged it around the world with no success whatsoever, with far more persistence than I would ever have shown, and eventually found a bankrupt pub in a slum in London that did plays in their back room, and they too thought the play had no commercial chance, but since they were bankrupt anyway, they thought they'd go out with a play they liked. And they opened it and brought me over to London, and Don Parker played in it there. And the next morning, they came and woke me in the room they had put me up in, which was a storage room for coal and potatoes, to tell me that the play was a raging smash and that there were people wanting me to sign contracts for translations into 60 languages.
My goodness, how did that feel for you? Was that overwhelming?
Well, I'd always known my plays were good. You know, it's just that in America the critics hadn't bothered to see them or hadn't had the sense to see them right. And in London, to my great surprise, the critics know about theater, they care about it, and even though a play is in the back room of a pub, they take it seriously. So I just felt I was getting what I deserved, to tell you the truth.
Now, Kennedy's Children is the most real to you of all your plays. I don't know if I'm expressing that correctly. The characters in Kennedy's Children.
The characters in Kennedy's Children
people.
are certainly real people I knew, or know. Some of them are still alive. I wrote the play to commemorate them. They were the bravest people I've ever known, the most gallant, humorous, expansive of mind, and they tried to make a revolution that failed, and I felt terrible about that. I felt terrible for them. I loved them and hated seeing them sink into despair, and wrote a play to understand and explain and commemorate their valor.
So you had an intention.
Oh, yes.
To do something for them.
The play is not about Kennedy. It's not about Monroe. It's not about Bobby Dylan. It's about their children. Wanda, the woman who was inspired by Kennedy to a life of service. Rona, the girl who was inspired by Bob Dylan to go out and try to change things. Carla, the woman who's inspired by Marilyn Monroe to go out and try to spread beauty all over the earth. They're who the play's about, not those big hero figures that they worshipped.
Why do you suppose Kennedy's Children continues to be performed?
I think, to get to the nitty-gritty, because it was on Broadway and became famous. You know, that's automatic fame to have a play on Broadway. It's my most performed play, but it's not my only play that gets played around. But I think basically because it was on Broadway and became famous, and because a lot of drama teachers now are people who were young in the 60s and to whom the play has an intense impact, and because for many good reasons the 60s are a terribly attractive period to young people now, as almost any period other than the 80s would be by contrast, but the 60s especially. the 60s was, can I give a message directly to your audience?
Go right ahead.
Any young people out there, everything you've heard is true. The 60s were the best time to be young in the history of the world, and don't let anyone tell you different. It was a wonderful time, and I think the kids sense that and want to experience it vicariously.
Why do you feel that way? And that impact on your life, is that why you can do what you do? Is it because you were around in the 60s and you were young in the 60s?
I learned a great deal of whatever courage and fortitude I have from the characters in Kennedy's Children, from those brave people. Mm-hmm. I come from a pioneer background, if you want to put it that way. In other words, my people who settled Texas were outlaws, brigands, failures who couldn't make it on the East Coast and came to Texas and got tough. So I came out of a I can do it kind of background, but it was really meeting those people in New York who showed me that I could do anything.
How does it feel for you today to come to Monmouth College, for example, and see Kennedy's Children being performed?
Well, the young woman who is playing Rona, the hippie girl here, had her parents come up from Texas last week to see it, and they told me that she was playing them. I mean, that experiences like that are priceless. I mean, here she was, not even born at the time the play ends, and yet she's playing her mother, you know, and to be a vehicle for that kind of continuity is perhaps as much as any artist can reasonably expect. One wants to change the world, to disseminate ideas, to do good in the world, and one hopes that will happen, but just to be a bridge between time is quite a lot to feel that you've accomplished.
I can't even imagine what that must feel like, to know that you've created even a greater closeness between a mother and a daughter. That's wonderful.
Depends on how you feel about being a bridge.
Now, the poster that was put together by Jeff Freeman at Monmouth College in order to promote the production was special to you, and it was a coincidence that it happened this way, but I wonder if you can get a shot of that.
Are they going to do a close-up of it?
Yes. Okay, can you
Sure.
explain what?
The reason this poster for Kennedy's Children is special to me is that it depicts a drawing based on a famous photograph, the young man with the blonde hair and the turtleneck sweater at the Pentagon riots, putting flowers into the rifles of young National Guardsmen who were standing facing him with their guns. And that's very special to me because this boy was a child actor at the Cafe Chino. His name was George Harris, later known as Hibiscus. Whenever we needed children to play in plays at the Cafe Chino, we would call the Harris family, and they would send over one of their many talented children. George was the eldest, and when he left home, after he got grown up, he went out to California and founded a very famous troupe of drag comedians called the Cockettes, wonderful historical group, and was present at the confrontation at the Pentagon, and I'm glad to say became a famous symbol of the love and peace of the 60s by putting those flowers in the rifles of young men who were standing with them pointed at him. He died about 5 years ago of AIDS, the first person I knew to die of AIDS. So I'm glad that he's remembered.
Does an experience like that, someone who was so important to you and then to meet such tragedy, is that the sort of thing that inspires you to write? Do you turn that then into something that you share with other people?
Once you have geared your mind and spirit towards writing plays as your main purpose in life, of course anything can feed the mill. The most trivial incident that amuses you can become a comedy. The profoundest personal pain can become the basis for a tragedy or a comedy. In my new book, Untold Decades, from St. Martin's, a book of 7 one-acts, the final play in it was commissioned by a friend who was dying of AIDS. I asked if there was anything I could do, which is a rather foolish question when someone has a fatal disease, and he said, yes, write me a funny AIDS play. And I thought it couldn't be done, but in honor of him I went home and did it. Any experience will do. It can be the personality of an actor. It can be the shape of a room. You might step into a room and say, oh, I like this. I know something that I would like to see happen here. It can be a theater manager calling you and saying, Bob, we had a show cancel out. We need a show up by Tuesday. Can you do it? And you write one. You see what actors are available, and you get it up by Tuesday. It can be anything.
You also write short stories.
I have just begun to write short stories. I've just written my first 2. And I think, maybe I shouldn't jinx this, but I think I may have sold them to Christopher Street magazine.
Wonderful.
This has been my year for doing new things. I painted a mural. I wrote a novel. I wrote short stories. I'm reviewing books. I submitted poetry to a contest. I've been doing all kinds of things I haven't done before. I've written some new songs for a man who does a Judy Garland show. I got tired of hearing the old Judy Garland numbers, so I accepted his dare to write some new material for Judy Garland. Just doing all kinds of things.
Now, when you write songs, do you write the music as well?
I usually make up the tune and then whistle it to a very brave pianist who tries to pick it out.
Do you read music?
No, only what you see.
That's wonderful. What's your favorite thing to write?
My favorite thing? Comedies. I love comedies.
Plays or stories?
Oh, plays, always. Everything else is a digression from that. I love to write comedies because then when you stand at the back of the theater, you know whether it's getting across to the audience or not. In a tragedy, you have to wait till the end to see if they applaud. But in a comedy, if they laugh at the jokes, you know they're listening. So I love that immediate feedback.
Is that where you prefer to see performances of your work, at the back of the theater?
At the back, yeah, way at the back.
So that you
where I can smoke. They don't let you smoke in theaters anymore. It's inhuman.
Is it frightening to see something that you've written, that you've struggled over perhaps, and then see it performed?
What's frightening about watching a performance of a play you've written is, some people say it's that you have no control. You know, the actors and director can do anything they want. Mm-hmm. And that's true. That's always frightening. But the most frightening thing is that now you're going to find out if you have given them what they need with your script. See, playwriting isn't like novel writing or poetry writing. It's not an independent thing. A play is not a piece of literature. A play is like a score for an orchestra or a program for a computer. It only comes alive when it works on a stage. And the job of a playwright is to create rhythms, images, events, mood, atmosphere for actors, not for an audience, but for actors to help them be the people. Then they make it happen for the audience, you know. So the frightening thing is watching that curtain go up or lights come on and watching those actors saying your words, provided they are saying them, and seeing if those words help them embody your character. And if they don't, then it's you who have failed, not the actors.
So do you think visually?
Of course. I'm a movie child, and I see the plays like a movie, and then I write down what they say. But you understand that a playwright has to put it all in the dialogue. It's the dialogue that must help the actors do the visual things. Mm. You can write all the stage directions you want, but if your dialogue isn't right, it won't happen.
What's the most perfect performance you've seen? And have you ever seen one that was exactly what you thought?
I have seen several. I'm very lucky. I'm not Neil Simon. My name on a marquee doesn't automatically draw lots of money to the box office. People don't do my plays unless they like them. So by and large, I see productions of my plays that people care about, and they're as good as they can make them. I have to mention Shirley Knight in Kennedy's Children on Broadway. Anyone who saw that knows that was one of the great creations of our time. Carol Nelson and Bonnie Young in the first production of my play, My Cup Runneth Over, were matchless and can never be equaled. I think those were, as far as seeing my plays done, those were the top two experiences, but I've had many, many good ones. The production of Judas at the Pacific Conservatory of the Performing Arts. I could go on forever. I'm lucky because the people that do my plays usually love them and work very hard. And
so they're connecting with what you've created. Do you ever use theater to teach? Are you trying to put a message out to people?
Certainly. A play can do anything. It can amuse, corrupt, teach, seduce, put off, badger. Every every play teaches an audience how the playwright sees the world. You can't help that, try as you might.
Has that ever been your intention for writing a
Yes,
particular
surely.
play?
There are particular plays that one does to show something. I don't know if teach is the right word. To get across usually when I write a play with a profound or obvious theme, it's because I want to put it in front of an audience and see if it's true. In other words, if it affects the audience strongly, then I say, okay, I'm not crazy, they see it too. In fact, that was the original title of Kennedy's Children. Thank God you see it too. Because I was in such despair at seeing the revolution fall, and I thought, perhaps it's not really happening. So I wrote the play with the idea of, if an audience reacted to it, I'd say, okay, they see it too. I'm not crazy. Thank God you see it too.
As a thinking, feeling person who is capable of creative expression coming through the 60s and seeing the world change, how does it feel for you now? What is approaching the 90s like?
Oh dear, how much time do we have left? I am only a playwright, I'm not a prophet, but I can tell you how one artist sees the world right now. Okay, I mean, that's all, for whatever value there is. I'm scared. I think most people who take any kind of broad overview are very frightened that we're avoiding the real problems. I mean the human race is avoiding its realist problems because they seem so overpowering and people are afraid, and they rush back to little things, or they find scapegoats, and that we're losing our grip on reality. The Western civilization especially, which rose to mastery because of its power over reality, science, technology, that we have lost our hold on it, and we're pretending that we haven't, and we're letting everything from pollution, the destruction of the ecology, our dreadful race problems, which we try to ignore, poverty, overpopulation, the conflict between our philosophies and politics and religion, and the old view of the world that they fit, and their utter destructive nature in the new world that we made. I mean, how do you feel? I feel scared to death.
Do you ever write to try to correct that, or to try to warn people, or share that
You're right.
fear?
A playwright, unless they're very rich and can afford 100 actors to do an epic play, nowadays a playwright is likely to be limited to 2 or 3 people on a simple set, and you try to think of a single dramatic incident that will somehow get across your idea. If you write preachily, it tends to turn people off. You try to think of a dramatic incident. Okay, when Shakespeare was trying to show how the independence of Protestantism and the English Renaissance were crashing into an old Catholic medieval moral code, he didn't have someone talk about it. He showed Hamlet having to decide for himself what was good and what was evil, no longer having a pope or confessor to go to. He showed an incident, a dramatic incident, which has a great power. One tends to look for that single moment in time that embodies great historical trends and forces and projects them where they hit deep. I mean, everyone knows we're destroying the earth. There would be no point in my having a character stand on stage and say, golly gee, we're messing up the environment. We all know it. What one could hope to do is to create a little dramatic module that might give people some energy, drive, and courage.
Now,
or just amuse them while it all falls down around us. I'm for either.
Now, when you teach playwriting.
I do teach playwriting, technique for playwriting.
Do you teach that, what you've talked about, take something that you feel about, or you feel strongly, or you're concerned about, and feel it and put it into a symbolic moment?
I teach everything that I've learned about the technique of playwriting. I don't want to tell people how to write or what to write. I want to give them the tools to express themselves and hope that they will be able to write what's in their minds with the tools I give them. I try, as you know, I've spent most of the last 12 years traveling around the country to high schools, minority theaters, small theaters, avant-garde theaters, trying to promote better and more theater everywhere and encourage the people who do it. And I've lost the track of my thought. I want to see what's in people's heads.
Teaching playwriting.
Yeah, I want to see what's in people's minds. I try very hard to be the kind of person that I wish someone had been for me. When I was out there in New Mexico and Texas, dreaming of some intelligent, sophisticated adult who would come in and tell me, yes, what you're thinking is right, no, what you're thinking is wrong, yes, you should fulfill yourself. And there were none. And I try to do that partly because it coddles that child that's still in me, and also because I'm scared to death of the kind of people our society is turning out. And I think any educator is terrified of the children, and they're liars if they say they're not. And I go out and try to make them better people, so I won't be scared when they grow up.
Now, your proudest achievement, it personally, is connected with that teaching, isn't it?
Oh, a few years ago, the International Thespian Society gave me their Founders Award for service to theater and to youth. Yes, I was very proud of that.
That is nice. That is nice. Is that the favorite area of what you're doing now, working with children?
Well, we have time. As a matter of fact, this year I quit doing that because after 12 years of doing it and traveling the same territory very often for 12 years, I felt that I was not doing enough good to make up for the energy I was putting into it. To put it simply, I felt I had been being used as a token liberal by a lot of fascist tools.
How's
that for a scoop?
Yeah, that is.
But it was,
sad.
At least I learned that. You know, we don't always learn what we want to learn, but I learned that.
Now,
I'm not talking about Monmouth College. I see no evidence of fascist toolism here yet.
Now, in your writing, you've learned something about your style of writing to transfer playwriting to short stories or any of the other things.
The short stories are as frightening to me as my first play was. So was my first book review.
Why is that?
Well, because it's a new world. I mean, people come to me to have me teach them to write plays because I've written so many. I'm supposed to know about it, and it seems to work. I wish I had someone to go to learn short story writing. It's a new world, and it's exciting and fun. You can have, one nice thing is you can tell what the people think in a short story. You can't do that in a play unless you're going to use soliloquies. You can just stop the action and say, deep in his heart, he felt terror, and it's real nice. Freedom.
Would you like to ever teach that type of writing?
If I ever learned enough about it to teach it.
Now, you mentioned a novel. Is your novel published?
I have just finished my first novel. It's called Temple Slave, and as soon as an intelligent publisher arises in America, it will be published. And it covers the years 61 through 67, the early years of the Cafe Chino and underground theater, the origins of Off-Off, the rise of the youth rebellion of the 60s. It's wonderful.
So it's historical.
It's called Temple Slave because that's what we all were, happy temple slaves in the early days of Off-Off Broadway.
Now, how much work goes into something like that?
A novel?
Yeah.
A lot. There's an awful lot of sheer typing into a novel, and mine's about 700 pages long.
Wow.
I took advantage of the freedom of the form, perhaps to excess. I loved it. It's great fun. All that room.
How long was it spinning around in your mind before you began?
Well, I had hoped to do a play about the early days of the Cafe Chino for some years, and it had never gelled. And then a publisher called and said, would you try writing a novel for us? And that...
And you just set your mind
there it
to it
was.
and
Suddenly
did it.
Temple Slave was a novel instead of a play.
Well, Robert Patrick, thank you very much
Sure.
for being with us today.
Can I give my message?
It's been wonderful. Okay,
You said I
very
could-
briefly, very briefly.
She said I could tell any message I wanted to. Tell the poor people of the world to stop having babies they can't afford to feed. Please.
We'll see you next week inside Monmouth College.